In this video, I'm going to show some of the steps involved in fabricating the custom intercooler piping for my car. Throttle body, obviously cooler pipe will come out here. I'm going to need to make a hole in the skirt here, where this is all now custom, there's no cooler piping holes yet. This will have to come down through here, and the first step will be to cut this hole and get our position right. So this is going to be quite a short little pipe. It's going to be made out of titanium pie cuts. It'll all be hand welded by me, obviously. So with positioning this clamp set and where the pipe will go through the skirt here, we don't want to go too close to this edge because it's going to make it very difficult to make the piping underneath the other side, being close to this. So we're going to come across far enough that it's going to make that easy, but not too far that it makes this pipe strange. So there's a balance there. Same with this way. You go too far back here, obviously that's going to be difficult. We're going to need to find a happy medium, and once we've found that, we will go around and mark the circle. So on the driver's side, the turbo is going to be low mounted, so the inlet of the turbo will be down here somewhere in this vicinity. The manifold is currently away getting polished, so I don't have it in there yet, but this is just to give you an idea. Intake pipe's going to come up here, air filter in this corner, all in 4-inch titanium pie cuts. Should be a nice showpiece for the bay, but for the intercooler piping, to keep space for the intake pipe, I'm going to go through this face here rather than through the top there, as the pipe would need to come up and then down, take up lots of space. If I can have the pipe go through this side here with some titanium pie cuts like this, and then snake back down over the alternator and into the bottom of the turbo, that'll be really nice. It'll still be semi-visible at the front here, get some nice welds on that, and should be a nice neat way to do it. So now that the pilot hole is drilled, we can go through and hole saw this out. We need the hole saw hole to be big enough for this flange to slip through, because the pipe will be coming from the intercooler underneath and then up through here. So I've got a 83mm hole saw. It's slightly smaller than the flange, but the hole saws, they always walk out just a little bit bigger than they're meant to be. So by the time that it's cut through and then I've cleaned up the edge and smoothed it out, it'll be probably the perfect size for this to be able to slide through there. So that hole's cut, the flange goes through nice and snug. Now usually I would cut this hole a lot larger to give the pipe more movement space for the engine to be able to rock backwards and forwards and the pipe to be able to move with it. But in this case, I'm trying something new that I haven't done before, actually taking some inspiration from a good friend of mine, Aaron, at Overtime Fab. He did something similar recently. I'm going to make a plate that mounts to the bottom of this hole. That will then be welded to the lower intercooler pipe that goes to the cooler. That will be solid mounted here, and then with a Wiggins clamp onto the intercooler. It should be fine as the intercooler is hard mounted to the car. This side then can be hard mounted because that's not going to move anything underneath. The movement will all be from here to the engine. This pipe will have wiggins on each end and it'll have plenty of movement for the engine to rock backwards and forwards. So we're down underneath the driver's side now. The hole is cut, the Wiggins ferrule slides through there nice and snug. Now I'm going to make a plate that borders this with a hole in the center, smaller, big enough to take the 2.5 inch pipe, because this pipe will be 2.5 inch and then it's going to taper up to 3 inch where it goes into the intercooler. I want to make this with, say, a 25 mil border all the way around, and then we're going to cut it flat across the top there. So this plate will now go in place here. It'll have a bolt through both sides to hold it in place. It'll get the pipe through here down to the intercooler welded to it. But now you can see there's a step here where this seam runs across, which makes this sit a bit not nice. So here and here, if the camera will focus. So here and here, we're going to put some little folds in it so that this plate has a step in it, so it sits flush on the back here and here. So now that has a nice little fold in it that fits in that edge much nicer. I like little details like this. Like, I could have just left it, it probably wouldn't have mattered. The bolts would just pull it down flat, whatever, but I don't know, it's these little details that make the quality of the overall car so much better in the end. It's all the little things that add up to one beautiful thing in the end. So now the holes are drilled in the plate, the holes are drilled in the car to match. I don't want bolt holes showing on the inside of the engine bay because I've gone to so much effort to shave everything. So my plan here to be able to mount this to the car without having a bolt head showing on the other side is to get a regular M6 bolt, M6 by 12, put it in the lathe, spin it and turn the head down so it turns into a stud with a flat head. So we've gone from that to that. This will then have this hole drilled out to the same diameter as that head, which is 9.5 mil. It'll go through. I'll TIG weld around the head of it on the inside of the engine bay, sand it smooth so you can't see it, and then I'll have a thread poking through that this can go over and have a nut bolt it down flat. The studs are welded, smoothed on that side. Primer. The panel can go back on. This, I may make a rubber gasket for this in the end as well. Not that it needs to be sealed, it'll just be nice to have some sort of rubber between these two so it's not wearing and ruining paint surfaces and stuff. So now that goes on like that. Couple of nuts to hold it in place. Just like that. So I've trimmed up this piece. It's actually a nice little offcut that I had. That's going to poke just through that plate. It'll get Wiggins weld on the top in the engine bay. This will rotate around, something like that. And now we're going to fill this last little gap with an aluminium donut. So we're going to measure the gaps and work out how much of this I need. So this isn't an exact science for me anyway, but I usually like to do this. Measure out, what's that, about 90? And then about 18. So we'll measure that out onto the donut, maybe cut it a little bit bigger, and then we can trim back and get the angles fitting right. So here's the donut. We measured about 90 millimeters. Don't forget, we're not measuring like around the radius, we're measuring across, because that's how I measured it. This is still kind of vague, it doesn't have to be exact, it's just a way to get an idea on what the angle is going to be. So that's about 90 mil there. The inside was 17, roughly, about there. Now what I like to do is I will put a straight edge on the bench, and then from looking above, line up the inside mark and the outside mark so that the straight edge is in the right plane, and then look down from above and scribe over the top. So now the tube goes back through, our new piece cut along the line there. It will line up somewhat. It's close. You can see the angle's a little off, but not bad to get started. Once this donut piece has its partner and it's welded together, we can use the linisher to give it a bit more angle to fill in what's missing here. Finished the angle onto this properly, cleaned up the ends of this, got the angle right for the top of this as well, so it all fits into place quite nicely now. So we rotate everything to its home. You can see that it all sits very nicely. So I'm going to attack this and this now. Get out the rotator, do some nice welds, put the Wiggins ferrule on the top of this pipe, and then this will get attached to that flange, and we'll have our lower intercooler pipe. Another thing I forgot to explain as well is that when I mount these clamps for fabrication work, I always like to have a O-ring in between the face of these two flanges, as once they're made they need to have space to move. In this application, because it's hard to the car here and mounted hard to the chassis, it doesn't really matter, but where these pipes need to have movement, they need space inside the clamp set to move. So I like to use an O-ring. I sit it in there and then clamp it all together, and that, once you assemble this finally, obviously the O-ring goes in its groove and that gap is then there for these to move freely. That in place, we can get it all sitting how it should. So now the pipe is done, all welded up, mounting plate attached, ready to go in. Onto the driver's side, I've made this reducer cone. You can see we're going from 2.5 inch, which will be going into the turbo, out into the intercooler, which is 3 inch. So I've made a transition piece here. You can see there's a weld down the seam, polished, made it look nice. And this is going to join up these two pipes. Just like that. So now I'm going to show the making of the titanium pie cut intercooler pipe from the throttle body down to the junction in the guard. I keep the towel in there just while I'm not working on it to stop anything falling in here. So as I'm putting pie cuts together, I like to use the seam on the inside as a marker. So you see that the seam is all in the same spot on each pie cut if they're all from the same batch. So if you line that internal seam up, that'll mean that these are all on the same plane and we'll just create a nice 90. But it's also good if I want to then put a twist in my pipe, because we're going to need to twist out and then down again. It's a good starting point to start here, and then we can rotate and rotate, and that'll give us an even twist now as we go through the change of shape. So now, after some fiddling and twisting and tweaking and adding a little straight in here, that's aluminium just to mock up this pipe. It will be cut in titanium, obviously, but it's a lot cheaper and easier to just cut a little bit of aluminium to work out where things are going to go. So these will go like this. Looks quite good. Obviously that straight needs to be a little bit longer, but it's going to look quite nice. As you tack these, things kind of like move and flex. Even while welding this is going to shrink a little bit. So I probably will weld a bunch of this before I actually weld the whole thing as one piece, so that I can make adjustments with the sizes as I go. But yeah, we've got our basic shape there. So I wasn't entirely happy with the coloring that I got, so I've hit this with the polishing wheel. I know not everybody's going to be like super excited about the fact that I've polished over the welds and they're not straight off the gun, but I wanted this to be nice and shiny and like a uniform silver to match a lot of the rest of the engine bay. So that's what I've come up with, and I'm very happy with it. The welds have come up really nice and uniform, having no stop starts. Being able to just spin it in the rotator is really handy. So I'm quite happy with the look of that, and we'll get it back in the engine bay. So now you have seen most of the process of making the intercooler piping on the car, all the way from the aluminium lower pipes with the mounting plates, all the way up to the titanium intercooler piping. Obviously I've only done this side so far, as I can't make this side yet due to the turbo manifold not being back from polishing, but as soon as that's here, I'll be able to do lower intercooler pipe, intake pipe, obviously dump pipe, exhaust, all the plumbing on this side. So we're waiting on that. But for now, very happy with the outcome of this. Looks great, will work very well. For anyone wondering, this is a pre-throttle body 4-bar map sensor. There will also be one inside the plenum at the back in one of the fittings. So we can get measurements of map pre and post throttle body, and then this second bung will be for a high-speed air temp sensor for the ECU as well. Thanks for watching another video. I hope you've learned something. I hope this was informative. If you have any questions about how or why I did any of this, please leave a comment, and I'll see you in the next video.